Gone Fishing by James H. Schmitz, Section 3. His eyes might have been open for several seconds before he became entirely aware of that fact. He was on his back, looking up at the low raftered ceiling of a room. The light was artificial, subdued. It gave the impression of nighttime outdoors. Memory suddenly blazed up. Tricked, came the first thought. Outsmarted, outfoxed, and by... Then that went lost in a brief, intense burst of relief at the realization he was still alive, apparently unhurt. Barney turned sharply over on his side. Bed underneath, he discovered, and stared around. The room was low, wide, something undefinably odd. He cataloged it quickly. Redwood walls, Navajo rugs on the floor, bookcases, unlit fireplace, chairs, table, desk with a typewriter and reading lamp. Across the room, a tall, dark grandfather clock with a bright metal disc instead of a clock face stood against the wall. From it came a soft, low thudding, as deliberate as the heartbeat of some big animal. It was the twin of one of the clocks he had seen in McCallan's living room. The room was McCallan's, of course, almost luxurious by comparison with his home, but wholly typical of the man, and now Barney became aware of its unusual feature. There were no windows. There was one door. So far to his right he had to twist his head around to see it. It stood half open. Beyond it, a few feet of narrow passage lay within his range of vision, lighted in the same soft manner as the room. No sound came from there. Had he been left alone? And what had happened? He wasn't in McCallan's home or in that fishing shack at the lake. The tube might have picked him up, somehow, in front of McCallan's house, transported him to the Majorca place? Or he might be in a locked hideaway McCallan had built beneath the Sweetwater beach house? Two things were unpleasantly obvious. His investigations hadn't revealed all of McCallan's secrets, and the old man hadn't really been fooled by Barney Shard's smooth approach. Not, at any rate, to the extent of deciding to trust him. Hot chagrin at the manner in which McCallan had handed the role of dupe back to him flooded Barney for a moment. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up. His coat had been hung neatly over the back of a chair a few feet away. His shoes stood next to the bed. Otherwise, he was fully clothed. Nothing in the pockets of the coat appeared to have been touched. Billfold, cigarette case, lighter, even the gun were in place. The gun, almost startlingly, was still loaded. Barney thrust the revolver thoughtfully into his trousers pocket. His wristwatch seemed to be the only item missing. He glanced about the room again, then at the half-open door and the stretch of narrow hallway beyond. McCallan must have noticed the gun. The fact that he hadn't bothered to take it away, or at least to unload it, might have been reassuring under different circumstances. Here, it could have been very disagreeable meaning. Barney went quietly to the door, stood listening a few seconds, became convinced there was no one within hearing range, and moved on down the hall. In less than 2 minutes, he returned to the room, with the first slow welling of panic inside him. He had found a bathroom, a small kitchen, a pantry, a storage room twice as wide and long as the rest of the place combined, crammed with packaged and crated articles, and with an attached freezer. If it was mainly stored food, as Barney thought, and if there was adequate ventilation and independent power, as seemed to be the case, then McCallan had constructed a superbly self-sufficient hideout. A man might live comfortably enough for years without emerging from it. There was only one thing wrong with the setup from Barney's point of view, the thing he'd been afraid of. Nowhere was there an indication of a window or of an exit door. The McCallan tube, of course, might make such ordinary conveniences unnecessary, and if the tube was the only way in or out, then McCallan incidentally had provided himself with an escape-proof jail for anyone he preferred to keep confined. The place might very well have been built several hundred feet underground. A rather expensive proposition, but aside from that, quite feasible. Barney felt his breath begin to quicken and told himself to relax. Wherever he was, he shouldn't be here long. McAllen presently would be getting in contact with him, and then... His glance touched the desk across the room, and now he noticed his missing wristwatch on it. He went over, picked it up, and discovered that the long white envelope on which the watch had been placed was addressed to him. For a moment he stared at the envelope. Then, his fingers shaking a little, he tore open the envelope and pulled out the typewritten sheets within. The letterhead, he saw without surprise, was Oliver B. McAllen. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Shard, an unfortunate series of circumstances combined with certain character traits in yourself make it necessary to inconvenience you in a rather serious manner. To explain, the information I gave you regarding that McAllen tube and my own position was not entirely correct. It is not the intractable instrument I presented it as being. It can be shut off, again quite readily and without any attendant difficulties. Further, the decision to conceal its existence was not reached by myself alone. For years we, that is Mr. Fredericks, who holds a degree in engineering and was largely responsible for the actual construction of the tube, and I have been members of an association of which I cannot tell you too much. But I may say that it acts, among other things, as the present custodian of some of the more dangerous products of human science, and will continue to do so until a more stable period permits their safe release. To keep developments such as the McAllen tube out of irresponsible hands is no easy task these days, but a variety of effective devices are employed to that end. In this instance, you happened upon a rigged situation, which had been designed to draw action from another man, an intelligent and unscrupulous individual who lately had indicated a disturbing interest in the events connected with the semi-public fiasco of my matter transmitter some years ago. The chances of another person becoming aware of the temporal incongruities which were being brought to this man's attention were regarded as so remote that they need be given no practical consideration. Nevertheless, the unexpected happened. You became interested. The promptness with which you acted on your chance observations shows a bold and imaginative manner of thinking on which you may be genuinely congratulated. However, a perhaps less commendable motivation was also indicated. While I appeared to be stalling on coming to decisions you may have regarded as inevitable, your background was being investigated by the association. The investigation confirmed that you fall within a personality category of which we have the greatest reason to be wary. Considering the extent of what you had surmised and learned, falsified though the picture was, this presented a serious problem. It was made more acute by the fact that this association is embarking on a 5-year plan of some importance. Publicity during this period would be more than ordinarily undesirable. It will therefore be necessary to see to it that you have no opportunity to tell what you know before the plan is concluded. I am sure you can see that it would be most unwise to accept your simple word on the matter. Your freedom of movement and of communication must remain drastically restricted until this 5-year period is over. Within the next 2 weeks, as shown by the clock in your quarters, it will have become impossible for me or for any member of the association to contact you again before the day of your release. I tell you this so that you will not nourish vain hopes of changing the situation in your favor, but will adjust as rapidly as you can to the fact that you must spend the next 5 years by yourself. What ameliorations of this basic condition appeared possible have been provided. It is likely that you will already have tried to find a way out of the cabin in which you were left. The manner of doing this will become apparent to you exactly 24 hours after I conclude and seal this letter. It seemed best to advise you of some details of your confinement before letting you discover that you have been given as much limited freedom as circumstances allowed. Sincerely yours, Oliver B. McAllen. Barney dropped the letter on the desk, stared down at it, His mouth open, his face had flushed red. "Why, he's crazy," he said it loud at last. "He's crazier than—" He straightened, looked uneasily about the room again. Whether a maniac McAllen made more desirable jailer than a secret association engaged in keeping dangerous scientific developments under cover could be considered an open question. The most hopeful thought was that Dr. McAllen was indulging in unsuspected and nasty sense of humor. Unfortunately, there wasn't the slightest reason to believe it. McAllen was wise to him. The situation was no gag, and neither was it necessarily what McAllen wanted him to think. Unless his watch had been reset, he had been knocked out by whatever hit him for roughly 5 hours. Or 17, he amended. But he would have been hungry if it had been the longer period, and he wasn't. 5 hours, then. 5 hours wouldn't have given them time to prepare the cabin as it was prepared for someone's indefinite stay. At a guess, McAllen had constructed it as a secure personal retreat in the event of something like a nuclear holocaust. But in that case, why vacate it now for Barney Shard? Too many questions, he thought. Better just keep looking around. The blank metal face on the grandfather clock swung back to reveal a group of 4 dials, each graduated in a different manner, only one of them immediately familiar. Barney studied the other 3 for some seconds, then their meaning suddenly came clear. The big clock had just finished softly talking away the 4th hour of the 1st day of the 1st month of year 1. There were 5 figures on the year dial. He stared at it. A 5-year period of something seemed to be the key to the entire setup. Barney shook his head. Key it might be, but not one he could read without additional data. He snapped the cover disc shut on the unpleasantly suggestive dials and began to go mentally over McAllen's letter. The business in that 24 hours, 20 now, the manner of leaving the cabin would become apparent to him. That seemed to dispose of the possibility of being buried underground here. McAllen would hardly have provided him with a personal model of the tube. He must be speaking of an ordinary door opening on the immediate environment equipped with a time lock. In that case, where was the door? Barney made a second and far more careful search. 3 hours later, he concluded it. He'd still found no trace of an exit, but the paneling in any of the rooms might slide aside to reveal one at the indicated time, or a section of the floor might swing back above a trap door. There was no point in attempting to press the search any further. After all, he had only to wait. On the side, he made other discoveries. After opening a number of crates in the storage room and checking contents of the freezer, he could assume that there was in fact more than enough food here to sustain one man for 5 years, assuming the water supply held out. There was no way of checking on it. The source of the water, like that of the power and the ventilation, lay outside the area which was accessible to him. But if the water could be depended on, he wouldn't go hungry or thirsty. Even tobacco and liquor were present in comparably liberal quantities. The liquor he'd seen was all good. Almost at random, he had selected a bottle of cognac and brought it in a glass to the main room with him. The thought of food wasn't attractive at the moment, but he could use a drink. He half-filled the glass, emptied it with a few swallows, refilled it, and took it over to one of the armchairs. He began to feel more relaxed almost at once. But the truth was, he acknowledged, settling back in the chair, that the situation was threatening to unnerve him completely. Everything he'd seen implied McAllen's letter came close to stating the facts. What wasn't said became more alarming by a suggestion of deliberate vagueness. Until that melodramatically camouflaged door was disclosed, 17 hours from now, he'd be better off if he didn't try to ponder the thing out. And the best way to do that might be to take a solid load on rapidly and then sleep away as much of the intervening time as possible. He wasn't ordinarily a hard drinker, but he'd started on the second bottle before the cabin began to blur on him. Afterwards, he didn't remember making it over to the bed. Barney woke up ravenous and without a trace of a hangover. Making a mental adjustment to his surroundings took no more time than opening his eyes. He'd been dreaming Dr. McCallum had dropped him into a snake pit and was sadistically dangling a rope 12 feet above his head, inviting him to climb out. To find himself still in the softly lit cabin was, for a few seconds at any rate, a relief. The relief faded as he sat up and looked at his watch. Still over an hour to go before McCallum's idiotic door became apparent. Barney swore and headed for the bathroom to freshen up. There was an electric shaver there, the end of its cord vanishing into the wall. Barney used it as meticulously as if he were embarking on a day of normal activities, prepared a breakfast in the kitchen, and took it to the main room. He ate unhurriedly, absorbed in his thoughts, now and then glancing about the room. After a few minutes, he uneasily pushed back the plate and stood up. If McCallum's 24 hours began with the moment the big clock in the room had been started, the door should be in evidence by now. Another tour of the place revealed nothing and left him nervous enough to start biting his nails. He moved about the room, looking over things he'd already investigated. A music cabinet. He'd thought it was a radio at first, but it was only an elaborate hi-fi record player. 2 enclosed racks of records went with it, mainly classical stuff apparently, and a narrow built-in closet with 3 polished fishing rods and related gear, which would have allowed for speculation on the nature of the cabin's surroundings, except that McCallum might feel compelled to have a sample of his toys around him wherever he was. Barney closed the closet door morosely, stood regarding the 2 crowded bookcases next to it. Plenty of books, reflecting the McCallum taste again, technical tomes, great literature, Dickens, Melville, The Life of Gandhi. Barney grunted and was turning away when another title caught his eye. He glanced back at it, hauled out the book. Freshwater Gamefish, Tested Methods of Their Pursuit. The author, O.B. McCallum. Bright light, daylight filled the room with so sudden a gush that Barney's breath caught in his throat. The book seemed to leap out of his hands. With the same glance he saw then the low, wide picture window which abruptly had appeared in the opposite wall, occupying almost half its space, and in the other wall on the far left a big door which was still swinging slowly open into the room. Daylight poured in through the window and door, and beyond them? For seconds he stared at the scene outside, barely aware of what he was looking at, while his mind raced on. He had searched every inch of the walls, and those thick wooden panels hadn't simply slid aside. The surfaces of door frame and window were flush with the adjoining wall sections. So the McCallum tube was involved in these changes in the room. And he might have guessed, Barney thought, that McCallum would have found more than one manner of putting the space-twisting properties of his device to use. And then, finally, he realized what he was seeing through the window and beyond the door. He walked slowly up to the window, still breathing unevenly. The scene was unfamiliar, but not at all extraordinary. The cabin appeared to be partway up one side of a heavily forested, rather narrow valley. It couldn't be more than a half a mile to the valley's far slope, which rose very steeply, almost like a great cresting green wave filling the entire window. Coming closer, Barney saw the skyline above it, hazy, summery, brilliantly luminous. This cabin of McCallum's might be in one of the wilder sections of the Canadian Rockies. Or, and this was a considerably less happy thought, it probably could have been set up just as well in some area like the Himalayas. But a more immediate question was whether the cabin was actually in the valley or only appearing to be there. The use of the tube made it possible that this room and its seeming surroundings were very far apart in fact. And just what would happen to him if he decided to step outside? There were scattered sounds beyond the open door, bird chirpings and whistles, the continuous burring calls of what Barney decided would be a wild pigeon. Then a swirl of wind stirred the nearer branches, He could feel the wash of the breeze in the room. It looked and sounded and felt all right. Barney scowled undecidedly, clearing his throat, then discovered that a third item had appeared in the room along with the door and the window. In the wall, just this side of the door at shoulder height, was a small ivory plate with 2 black switches on it, presumably the controls for the door and window. Barney went over, gingerly touched the one on the right, watching the window, then flicked up the switch. Instantly, the window vanished. The wood paneling again covered the wall. Barney turned the switch down. The window was back. The door refused to disappear until he pushed it shut. Then it obeyed its switch with the same promptness. He went back across the room, returned with one of Macallan's fishing poles, and edged its tip tentatively out through the door. He wouldn't have been surprised if the tip had disintegrated in that instant, but nothing at all occurred. He dug about with the pole in the loose earth beyond the doorsill, then drew it back. The breeze was flowing freely past him. A few grains of soil blew over the sill and into the room. The door seemed to be concealing no grisly tricks and looked to be safe enough. Barney stepped out on the sill, moved on a few hesitant steps, stood looking around. He had a better view of the valley here, and the better view told him immediately that he was not in the Canadian Rockies. At least, Canada, to his knowledge, had no desert. And on the left, this valley came to an end perhaps a little more than a mile away from the cabin, its wooded slopes flowing steeply down to a landscape which was dull rust red, flat sand stretches alternating with worn rock escarpments, until the desert's rim rose toward and touched the hazy white sky. Not so very different from... Barney's eyes widened suddenly. Could he be in the Sierras? Perhaps not more than 3 or 4 hours' drive from Los Angeles? 3 or 4 hours' drive if he had a car, of course, but even so. He stared around, puzzled. There were no signs of a human being, of human habitation, but somebody else must be here, somebody to keep guard on him. Otherwise, there was nothing to stop him from walking away from this place, though it might very well be a long, uncomfortable hike to any civilized spot. Even if this did turn out to be the Himalayas or some equally remote area, there must be hill tribes about if one went far enough. There should even be an occasional airplane passing overhead. Barney stood just outside the door, frowning, pondering the situation again, searching for the catch in it. Macallan and his friends, whatever else they might be, weren't stupid. There was something involved here that he hadn't become aware of yet. Almost without thought then, he turned up his head, squinting at the bright, hazy sky above him, and saw it. His breath sucked in and burst from his lungs in a half-strangled, terrified squawk as he staggered backward into the cabin, slammed the door shut, then spun around and began slapping frantically at the switches on the wall plate until door and window were gone and only the cabin's soft illumination was around him again. Then he crouched on the floor, his back against the wall, shaking with a terror he could have hardly imagined before. He knew what the catch was now. He had understood it completely in the instant of glancing up and seeing that tiny, brilliant, blue-white point of light glared down at him through the incandescent cloud layers above, like a blazing, incredibly horrible insect eye. This world's sun. End of section 3.